Weapons of war, the debate over surplus military equipment going to local police departments. Seeing is believing, reaction to the video that puts NFL star Ray Rice out of work. Stopping short, a Dutch report does not directly implicate a missile hit on Malaysia Flight 17. And Synod Synopsis, Rome correspondent Alan Holdren previews October's Synod on the Family. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 9th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The sometimes violent protests in Ferguson, Missouri last month were revisited today here in Washington. Lawmakers are debating whether police departments are too militarized. Wyatt Goolsby reports from Capitol Hill tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, senators from both parties say they are not happy about what they're seeing in police departments across the country. There are 3 different federal programs that provide tactical gear, weapons, and in some cases armored vehicles to police departments. But it's those programs that lawmakers say need to change.
The images of violent conflicts between police and protesters in Ferguson, Missouri are hard to shake for many. Law enforcement in full body armor, gas masks, rifles, and heavy vehicles holding back unarmed civilians. Whether it's appropriate for local police and sheriff's departments to have and use military-grade gear was the question.
Tell me, how do they decide an MRAP's appropriate for a community of my hometown, 35,000 people?
That is done by the state coordinator.
I understand that, but how did you ever decide that an MRAP is an appropriate vehicle for local police forces?
They also wanted to know if money was being wasted by purchasing some gear never used by the military.
We can argue about brand new, or like new. What in the world are we doing buying things that we're not using? And isn't that a fundamental problem that you need to get at?
The Obama administration announced last month a review of the surplus program, and there's been a greater amount of surplus gear in the years following the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, gear worth hundreds of millions of dollars distributed across the country. The Department of Defense concedes there are ways things can be improved.
There's probably a failure in coordination across the interagency regarding what we're providing.
Senators say they want to make sure police departments are equipped, but with the appropriate gear for their communities. Today, protesters with the anti-war group Code Pink told EWTN News Nightly today's Senate hearing was a step in the right direction.
I hope that what's happened in Ferguson will allow us to create a network now moving forward that goes across the political spectrum in order to demilitarize the police.
Senators today echoed President Obama's statement from August, saying there's a clear distinction between the military and the local law enforcement. They say that distinction is part of American tradition. Senators also say that this is an issue they will continue to hold hearings on and meet about in the future. Brian?
All right, Wyatt Goolsby reporting from Capitol Hill tonight. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. President Barack Obama will unveil his plan to confront militants in Iraq and Syria tomorrow in a primetime address to the nation. Today, the president laid some of the groundwork, meeting with congressional leaders from both parties at the White House. Obama hopes to get lawmakers on board with the strategy he'll outline in his speech. White House officials aren't saying if the president will actually seek formal approval for military action. And there's debate within Congress on whether he even needs that authorization. Speaker John Boehner says ISIS is a serious threat. He says he is waiting to hear the president's strategy before making any judgments.
I am looking for a strategy from the president that takes on this terrorist threat and defeats it.
The president believes it's important for the American people to understand what progress we have made so far, and the progress that we've made so far is important and substantial. The president also believes it's important to communicate with the American public about a key turning point, and the formation of an inclusive Iraqi government is a key turning point.
The U.S. is already launching airstrikes against militants in Iraq. That action was taken at the invitation of the Iraqi government and without authorization from Congress. Joining us now, Nebraska Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Jeff, what do you think the president will say tomorrow about the strategy against ISIS? What do you hope he will say?
Well, I hope the president is firm and at the same time uplifting. You know, the United States intervened on behalf of the Yazidi community who is in the Nineveh Plain, an ancient religious minority that was trapped on Mount Sinjar. This was in the wake of the ISIS movement, a religious fanatic movement that flies the black banner of death that's overtaken large swaths of Syria and Iraq, overtook, for instance, the town of Mosul, where the Christian community had thrived for 1,600 years. They came in, and the remaining Christians were told, pay the tax, convert to Islam, or die by the sword. And they painted the Arabic letter "in" on the doors in blood red, which stands for Nazarene, which is a denigrating term for the Christians. So this whole issue of religious persecution of minorities, the Christians, Yazidis, and others, is not just an assault to the people of faith. It should be an assault to people of goodwill who recognize that this is a deterioration of civilization itself.
Do you think with the proper strategy that the Islamic State can be pushed back and there will be at some point a return to normalcy for these Christians that have been there for centuries?
I expect the President will probably emphasize that this needs to be an international strategy, and I agree with that. We are not going to send boots back onto the ground, U.S. armed forces on the ground in Iraq. The central government of Baghdad, to the degree it can, has to regenerate itself and has to pay close attention to pluralism and protection of religious minorities. But a key element here also is the Kurdish region. The Kurds have the potential capacity to fight back ISIS. We should empower them and allow them to create a protectorate zone for Christians and other minorities, particularly in the Nineveh Plain area. And that way you're pushing back ISIS, containing them, and then the rest of the international community has to help cut off supplies and weaponry and all the other things we can do to degenerate their capacity.
There's a new government taking shape in Iraq. Can it meet this challenge?
Well, that's a hard question. You watched as basically they collapsed. Their political fecklessness deteriorated the situation, and only until the reality of the wolf being at the door, so to speak, did they seemingly come together and form some new type of government. This goes back a couple years where a status of force agreement was not agreed to by the United States and Iraq, so we left swiftly, no residual force left behind, not to interfere in Iraqi affairs, but it created conditions for a vacuum where we don't have a rapid force available, where the training of Iraqis to be the frontline protection against Islamic jihadists like we've seen is not there. So an overdependence on the government, the central government of Iraq, is probably not prudent, but we have to push them as hard as we can to fight for themselves.
Do you see bipartisan support for an effort here by the United States to really take some kind of action?
Again, if it's in the context of an international effort, the United States can initiate this, but the international community has to fulfill. It's not going to become the United States a problem alone. We have expended great resources, treasure, and great sacrifice of a number of soldiers and their families in Iraq. And if they won't fight for themselves, we can't fight for them. However, that does not mean that we don't initiate action and compel the international community to form a coalition that squeezes this threat to Christians, to Yazidis, other religious minorities, and gives the Iraqi central government at least a chance to regenerate itself, and then maybe some stability for the ancient communities who have a right to be there as much as anyone else.
Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, it's always good to have you with us. We look forward to having you back.
Pleasure to see you.
The World Health Organization says the Ebola outbreak is now reaching dire proportions. Meanwhile, another American infected with the virus arrives back here in the States for treatment. The fourth American infected with Ebola landed in Atlanta this morning. Doctors at Emory University Hospital will treat the patient in a special isolation unit to ensure the deadly virus does not spread. The healthcare worker, whose name hasn't been released, apparently got the illness in Sierra Leone. Unlike the other two Americans who were treated there, this patient will not get an experimental serum for now.
But again, we will fall back on our standard protocols.
Those protocols include treating the symptoms
Importantly,
and
to be able
boosting the
to improve upon their nutritional
system.
status so that the reparative mechanisms of the body are ongoing and that immune system recovers to clear the virus.
This comes as the U.S. government announced a $10 million contribution to help combat the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. The money will help train and equip some 100 additional healthcare workers in the area. This in addition to $100 million already pledged. The World Health Organization describes the growing Ebola outbreak as a dire emergency. The WHO says several thousand more cases of Ebola are expected in the next 3 weeks. The deadliest Ebola outbreak in history has already killed more than 2,200 people. And Dutch investigators release a preliminary report on the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. The review says high-energy objects from outside the aircraft caused the crash. The report stopped short of saying the plane was actually hit by a missile. Investigators say the report was not to assign blame for the crash.
There was, of course, an armed conflict going on the ground, that's for sure. We can't draw that conclusion now. We are only for how did the crash happen, what are the elements, how is the spreading of the wreckage on the ground, etc.
Because the area around the crash site in eastern Ukraine is still contested, the Dutch investigators were unable to personally review the wreckage. Flight 17 crashed in mid-July. The U.S. and others accused pro-Russian separatists of shooting the plane down with a ground-to-air missile. A former Chicago gang member convicted of supporting al-Qaeda gets a new prison sentence. Jose Padilla was convicted in 2007 of supporting the terror group and sentenced to 17 years. But his new sentence, as of today, is 21 years. A court of appeals determined that the judge made a mistake in giving him credit for the years served without charge as an enemy combatant and failed to account for the heightened risk that he posed. A federal air marshal is recovering after being attacked in Nigeria with a syringe. The FBI says they don't know what was in the syringe, but the marshal tested negative for the Ebola virus. The attack happened Sunday, and the marshal was flown to a Houston hospital for treatment. No arrests have been made in this case. Home Depot confirms customers' data has been hacked at stores across the nation. The company isn't saying how many cards were affected, but says there's a breach and it started around April. The hackers may have used malware to breach the network. Home Depot says it will install terminals that accept credit cards with chips embedded in them by the end of the year to strengthen security. With more than 2,000 stores, Home Depot is the country's largest home improvement chain. Shares for Home Depot sank earlier today as a result of this news. The Obama administration continues its legal battle tonight against the Little Sisters of the Poor. The religious order is dedicated to caring for the elderly poor at homes all across the world. This week's developments came at a federal appeals court in Denver. Lawyers for the nuns say it's the government's latest attempt to force the Little Sisters to comply with the Health and Human Services contraception mandate. They responded by filing a brief on behalf of the religious order Monday evening in Denver. The Little Sisters are represented by the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, which also represents EWTN in a similar lawsuit. Bishops from across the world will gather in Rome next month for the Synod on the Family. The Vatican just announced those who will be there. Alan Holdren has more. Alan, this meeting is getting a lot of attention, but what exactly is a synod?
Well, Brian, a synod is a series of meetings that go on over the course of a couple of weeks here in the Vatican, inviting bishops from all over the world to talk about a specific topic or a specific region of the church. In this case, this year, they're going to be talking about challenges to the pastoral care of the family. And for this reason, they're also inviting married couples, two in particular from the United States, and also another couple from Iraq, to be able to give their input to these meetings.
So what are the main topics that the bishops will address?
The one that's taken sort of the limelight in the lead up to this year's synod is that of communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. This is one among many other issues that they're going to be speaking about. Others are cohabitation of couples before marriage or even same-sex marriage. All of these are going to fit into this 2 weeks of meetings before next year's meetings, so they don't expect any major decisions to be made this year. We're going to be there every step of the way, bringing this to you from Rome. Brian?
All right, thank you. Our Alan Holdren reporting from Rome tonight. Coming up, he could have killed her. Sports agent Leigh Steinberg pulls no punches discussing the Ray Rice domestic violence case. On your Tuesday, September 9th, this is EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for being with us. I'm Brian Patrick. Christians are facing war, persecution, even death in some parts of the Middle East right now. This week, faith leaders from that region are joining forces here in Washington. Jason Calvi was with them throughout the day today, joining us tonight. Jason?
Brian, you know, they've come from across the world to share their experiences to let the world know about a global war on Christians. Their goal is to show solidarity with one another and to urge the United States to defend Christians and other religious minorities. The Christian leaders are right now praying together, and they'll be taking their cause to Capitol Hill tomorrow. There, they'll be meeting with Democratic and Republican senators and representatives. The church leaders will be resources for lawmakers to help them strategize about ISIS and struggles in places like Iraq and Syria. It's all part of a 3-day summit organized by the group called In Defense of Christians. The meeting marks the first time 5 Middle Eastern Christian patriarchs have been together in the United States. They include the Maronite Patriarch, the head of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, the head of the Syriac Catholic Church, and also other Catholic and Orthodox bishops. Cardinal Leonardo Sandri from the Vatican's Office for Oriental Churches is also here with a message from the Holy Father. A leader in the Armenian Orthodox Church described the crisis to me.
We are dealing with an evil. It's a global evil. It's not only an evil pertaining to the Christian communities, but to all human beings. And that is why I think we need to develop a kind of strategy together by which we can eradicate this evil.
And they'll have the chance to do just that this week as they join together. Christians are the most widely persecuted group, Brian. That's according to the Pew Research Center.
A very interesting and important gathering. Thank you, Jason. Ivy League schools are on the best of list from U.S. News and World Report. Princeton, Harvard, and Yale are at the top 3 national and value schools in the magazine's latest annual report. The ratings for the colleges are based on categories like graduation rates, selectivity, and freshman retention. Columbia and Stanford round out the top 5. According to the magazine, the best public schools are UC Berkeley, UCLA, and the University of Virginia. Americans are saving more for their college education, and others, according to a new study. The College Saving Plan Network says $20,000 is now the average amount in 529 savings plans. That's almost double what Americans put into those plans during the middle of the recession. There's one slight problem with this good news about savings. As tuition has increased, that $20,000 of savings will only cover about the first year at a public university. On social media today, Janae Rice, the wife of former Ravens running back Ray Rice, defended her husband. This after a video was released yesterday showing him knocking her out in an elevator before they were married. Also today, Nike is severing business ties with Rice, and video game publisher Electronic Arts is saying it will scrub all traces of his image from the Madden 15 video game. The Baltimore Ravens released Ray Rice this week, and the NFL has suspended him indefinitely. Prior to Monday's release of the TMZ video, the league punished Rice by suspending him for just 2 games. The punching incident happened in February, a month before the couple got married. Sports agent Leigh Steinberg, representing the biggest names in the NFL, joining us from Irvine, California. Leigh, you've been at this for a long time, 40 years. How do you respond to Roger Goodell's reaction and then reaction to the reaction of the public in this business of Ray Rice and domestic violence charges?
The commissioner knew everything he needed to know at the time he issued the initial discipline. He understood what had happened in that elevator. He should have acted more decisively. Policy in the NFL should not be made by a TMZ tape and the public reaction to it.
Is there any incentive for the NFL to act on its own other than public pressure?
They're a public entertainment, and so they're not butter on the table or eggs. They're not transportation to work. There's something that relies on fan support to buy tickets, to play fantasy, to go to watch on television. They need that public approval.
Ray Rice isn't the only one. There are others in the league who have been charged with domestic violence. Is the process that the NFL now has, is it adequate? Is it working? What changes would you suggest?
It didn't work with Ray Rice. We'll have to give the new domestic violence policy a chance to be unrolled and see how it works. But there's got to be better investigation, and there has to be more dramatic punishment.
Well, Ray's wife, Janae, responded to the situation on Instagram this morning, talked about how she and Ray will show the world what real love is. She said, to take something away from the man I love that he has worked for all his life just to gain ratings is horrific. This is our life. So how do you respond to a statement from a victim defending someone who has committed an act of violence against her?
I feel bad for her. This is a common occurrence in domestic violence where the victim stands up for the victimizer. This is a larger issue than her. This is a big societal issue, NFL issue. We need to act on this.
Now, Ravens coach John Harbaugh has said that the couple is making positive changes in their relationship. Should the NFL take that into consideration in this case?
Absolutely not. The key here is to prevent this kind of conduct from happening again, and a strong deterrent message needs to be sent.
Leigh, you've worked with these guys. You know they are trained to be fierce competitors, strong, violent on the field. Then you get into this situation with domestic violence, which is wrong, it's illegal. How do you work with guys like that in that situation so that they see the difference?
By making it very clear to them that they're no different than boxers, that with their strength and power, their hands can be used in a way that might kill someone, especially a diminutive woman, and they're not to put their hands on anyone except on a football field, and to make that part of the education process prior to them even getting into the league when they're just draftees.
All right, sports agent Leigh Steinberg, thank you so much for the insight that you gave us tonight. Up next, Navy medics preparing to treat combat trauma overseas are sent to Chicago's front lines for training. We're very grateful you're joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with EWTN News Nightly, and it's almost become a tradition. Today, the anticipation over Apple's new creations is once again over. The tech company unveiled the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus in California today. The new iPhones are thinner with curved edges and larger screens. They use Apple's new operating system and will be in stores in a couple of weeks. Apple also debuted its first wearable product, a smartwatch that will come out next year, and Apple hopes to get a slice of mobile payments. Apple Pay allows customers to make in-store purchases using their phones. Street violence in Chicago makes hospital workers there experts in critical care. Catherine Elliott reports that the military is now tapping that expertise.
Surrounded by doctors and nurses, a gunshot victim lays on the operating table at a Chicago hospital located near some of the most troubled neighborhoods on the south and west side. Gun violence is so closely associated with Chicago, the Windy City has picked up another nickname, Chirac. Which is why the Navy has started a program to train medics who will work in war zones here. Navy Lieutenant Commander Jared Bernard says it's a unique chance for corpsmen and nurses to get stateside experience.
We want to get them down here and involved taking care of penetrating trauma, because that's what we take care of overseas all the time. And this is one of the major hospitals in the country where we deal with a lot of penetrating trauma.
At this hospital, they treated nearly 600 gunshots here alone. While there are no IEDs exploding in Chicago, there are parallels in the care given here.
You'd have a lot of injuries perhaps from landmines and IEDs, and here we'll have high-speed car crashes which can cause similar types of injuries to the extremities. And so then you need to do hemorrhage control here or there, and a lot of the skills are very transferable.
Before deploying to Afghanistan, Navy Petty Officer 2nd Class Dwight Kuntz received 6 months of basic skills training for his job as a corpsman, and 2 months of field training dealing with combat casualties.
We are embedded with them. We become part of their unit, and we do everything that the Marines do. And then when one of them goes down, we're the first ones there to take care of them.
This is his first time training in a civilian hospital.
This morning, it was full of patients who had gunshot wounds and then a car accident, and all 4 of them went to the operating room. 3 of them went to the operating room today, so it gets very busy here.
The civilian-military partnership aiming to better prepare those who serve. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for joining us tonight. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.